Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to the Muslim Matters podcast, where we discuss everything under the sun that affects Muslims, such as faith, local and global politics, social media, sex education, civil rights, and family matters, all coming from a traditional Orthodox perspective. Subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle, Muslim Matters, and check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome to the Muslim Matters podcast. I am your host, Zainab bint Younus, and our guest today is Shifaa Syed, the founder of Canada's first modest thrift store. Welcome to the podcast, Shifaa.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for having me.
I heard about your project through Instagram just around the time you first launched a few weeks ago, I think, and I was immediately intrigued by the premise. So tell us more about this concept of a modest resale store and what inspired you and how you launched.
Okay, amazing. So, alhamdulillah, I started my brand Hijabi Designs about 2 years ago, but I started the thrift store just about, I think, like a month or two ago, and subhanAllah, it has grown so much so fast, so it's been very, very exciting so far, alhamdulillah. So the whole idea started was with Hijabi Designs, where I essentially would create art and products that made Muslim women feel represented, because as a Muslim woman myself, I felt like there just wasn't a lot of representation. Like growing up, my parents would try their best to, surround me with as many like Islamic Muslim influences as possible. But of course, the older you got, like the more you realize that, maybe there's some things tailored towards kids, but, like not towards teenagers or towards like adults, right? Okay, like I have tools, I have the skills, like let me just get this going. So I started around COVID, and then just a couple of months ago, I realized that I had the ability to do more with my brand and more with, what I was, alhamdulillah, the resources that I had. So that's when I started Hijabi, which is Canada's first Muslim thrift store. I like to say resale shop because I think that's technically more accurate, but in terms of the essence of what it definitely is a thrift shop. The way that Hijabi works is that we essentially purchase lightly used modest clothing from the Muslim community. We fix it up, we wash it, and then we sell them on our website, essentially. And the goal here is to make clothing affordable for Muslim women, because literally it's so expensive. It is
Tell me about it. Oh man.
Like subhanAllah, like literally just being a Muslim woman, it like costs more to exist. And that to me was just like so bizarre. Like, and I think it's a very uniquely like Western problem. Like if you go overseas, like, the clothing is relatively decent. There's like modest options, but here, because they're shipping the clothes over and because like it's a lot more expensive to make, like we're in a very like awkward position. Right.
Yeah, like jacks the price up. And then I would say too, there's the issue of, like as you said, overseas clothing just generally is more modest anyway. It's not like they're necessarily hunting for making things halal. Like that's just the default. And then of course things like abayas and hijabs are so much more widely available than they are here. And yeah, there's definitely a lot of challenges and expense associated with just trying to live your life as a decent Muslim.
Exactly, subhanAllah, honestly insane. So that's when, alhamdulillah, we started Hijabi, which is unique in the sense, honestly, I've only seen this done maybe once or twice, where we actually purchase the clothes, right? I think most of stores, they accept donations, but I specifically did not want to do a donation model because I actually wanted to somehow give back to the Muslim community. I think that we're so used to just kind of like taking or giving, but it's like I want it to be like a full circle moment, where, like there can be an empowering aspect to the cycle at every point in the process, right?
Yeah,
so alhamdulillah,
sure.
So that's honestly, like I've only seen this done, I think Plato's Closet is like the closest thing that I've seen before, where like they'll offer you some sort of money for your clothes, and then but they don't wash the clothes, right? And then again, there's like a very limited selection, right? This is the first time I've seen what I've done like existing, right? So alhamdulillah, it's very, very exciting, and there's been a very, very good response to it. Alhamdulillah, so far I think people really are like realizing that, okay, this is what we need. So alhamdulillah, it's been amazing so far.
And can you just clarify for the listeners, like, is it a physical shop? How do you do it?
As of right now, it's a pop-up shop and online store. Inshallah, in the future, we would love to do a physical store. I think like at the growth rate it's happening, I think inshallah it's definitely like, a vision, hopefully. But as of right now, it's online store and pop-up shop.
And I did check out the prices actually, and they're really reasonable, like $15, $20, which I think does an amazing job of making it accessible as you said. And that's really tied into like how, yeah, like as you already mentioned, like it is expensive to dress as a hijabi, to dress in modest clothing. And I want to elaborate on that a little bit more because modest fashion is a huge niche right now. Like non-Muslim brands and influencers are jumping on this trend as well. It's a booming business and prices really aren't cheap. So like, and now I think about there are North American based brands, there's UK brands, there's overseas brands as well. Like Modernisa is like super popular, right? Like, and even though like you can find affordable things, but it's always hit and miss, especially when you're doing online shopping, right? So what role do you think your thrift store will play in the accessibility of modest fashion? Like, what are your thoughts about the accessibility angle to begin with?
SubhanAllah, honestly, I think this will really be, I know this sounds a bit biased, but I think really, inshallah, this will be like a game-changing thing. Like, so many sisters have messaged me who are either like new hijabis or converts being like, listen, sis, like, I needed this. Thank you so much, and like, where can I get it? And like, SubhanAllah, like, people really need this sort of service. And alhamdulillah, I have to say, like, I'm privileged enough where, maybe, yes, like as a student, maybe I'll break the bank a little bit trying to get a new abaya or a new hijab, but I still can. But there's so many sisters out there who like it's very difficult for them to start that journey, right? Like for financial reasons or for accessibility reasons. So I really think that this will open up the avenue in so many ways, inshallah. Yeah, like I think that what's unique about hijab is that even though we are a thrift store, we try to angle ourselves with quality, right? Like every single item should either be lightly used, should be something that still looks and feels brand new, right? A lot of thrift stores, it's like you go there and like the clothing is really, it really is a hit or miss, right?
Yeah.
But with hijab, it's like a modest clothing alternative that is, inshallah, like high quality, right? Or like at least decent quality for a good price, right? Like you haven't seen that somehow like anywhere, at least from what I can see.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I mean, thrifting by itself has become trendy over the last few years, so that's another thing to keep in mind. And when I was looking at the website, I was actually surprised to see how affordable things were because I was totally expecting like when I go to, I don't know, like Value Village or something, they're still selling things at what I would consider almost regular price, brand new, right? Like $30-$40. And I'm like, is this really thrift store prices though?
That's so true.
And it's tied back into like the gentrification of certain things and how like thrift stores originally were meant to make things affordable and accessible, to take used clothing and used items and make them affordable for those who are not able to necessarily afford it brand new. But it's turned into another barrier instead. So that's refreshing to see that like right now the way that you've set things up, it's very professionally done. It's still affordable. And I wanted to ask actually, like, what would your thoughts be on whether, like, if other people wanted to kind of replicate your model? Would you say, like, yeah, it's like fairly easy to do, or,
It is. Like theoretically, it's not hard to replicate, right? Like I was doing research before I started this to see, is there anyone else doing what I'm doing the way that I'm doing it? And like I couldn't find anyone. But I think that like theoretically, it's not hard to do. Like really, it's not. Like you collect the clothes, you fix them up, you sell them, right? Like it's not a new concept,
Right.
but the way that I'm doing it is very unique, and I think that is actually very hard to replicate. It's very tempting for people where it's like, okay, you're given a clothes that's maybe been worn once or twice and somebody bought it for like $90. It's so tempting to be like, okay, I could easily price this for $50. Like that would be extremely fair, right? But the goal here really with that mentality is that that's not the point, right? The point really isn't for me to price my margins as high as possible, and get the value out of it that I think is appropriate. The goal here really is to serve the Muslim community, right? And I think that mentality is hard to come by in the way, someone like I really think that like especially being a Muslim business as well, like the idea that you have to do things with ihsan, you have to do things with excellence, right? To like that genuine aspect, I suppose. I think that mindset is hard to come by because we live in a very capitalistic society, right? Where it's like the highest margins, that's the point. How can I get the most money out of this, right? But I think the mentality of this is truly a service and I actually just want to, make things affordable and accessible for the Muslim community, that mindset is difficult to replicate, I think. But inshallah, if there's more people who had that, that's the goal. Inshallah, like, there's no competition in that case, right? It's like, let's
Right,
have
no.
more of these, right?
Sure, and I'm so glad you brought that up because I was just gonna say, like it's an interesting balance between having ethical principles of ihsan, as you said, as a Muslim, and keeping in mind like even the aspect of barakah in your work compared or rather contrasted with business principles of make the most money. So if anybody else wants to get into this, they need to have that in mind that this is not a money making scheme. It's literally kind of the opposite. You have to have a higher goal in mind.
Yeah.
And that's the ultimate purpose behind this kind of effort. And, I was just thinking about it and I'm like, this would actually be a pretty great initiative for Masajid to take on as well. Because like a lot of people, like you said, converts too, right? New Muslims, who are very new to Islam and don't quite know how to navigate where to get hijabi fashion from, that kind of thing. It's a great resource to have in your local masjid if people are able to do this. But as you said as well, kind of maintaining that standard of quality because unfortunately in our communities, a lot of people are used to just dumping garbage in the name of quote unquote donations. And then you got to like sift through all of that. And I have definitely done my fair share of wading through people's literal garbage that they've left and said like, oh, this is a donation. And we're like, nobody wants us. It's literally rags.
One of the things that I tried to do with this is that, like, the whole principle of like doing unto others what you would for yourself, like every piece of clothing that I get, it's would I truly be able to buy this if I were in the buying position, and that's another reason why I try to purchase the clothes, even though alhamdulillah we do accept donations, by the way, but even those donations have to go through like a very strict criteria list. But the reason why we typically purchase the clothes, one of those reasons is because people will typically give higher quality items. If it's most thrift stores, people just dump their junk and like there's like costs was throwing those clothes out, and it's just a whole pain, and it's like we don't want to deal with that. Like, I really think that's honestly one of the problems with a lot of communities, but including the Muslim community, where like we feel like, oh, we're doing a good deed, we're throwing out our clothes, but it's like, would we honestly wear those ourselves? Clearly not.
Exactly.
There's just that hypocrisy.
You mentioned too, like the cost of throwing clothes out, and I think that's really important to mention because a lot of people don't think that far, right? They're just like, oh, I'm tossing something, and it, out of sight, out of mind. And people don't really realize just how many tons and tons of waste, like landfill waste, that clothing can cause. And sustainability is therefore like another really serious concern for us, at least insofar as we're trying to think more deeply about our footprint and our impact in the world around us. There's fast fashion options like Shein, which became really, really popular over the last couple of years. But those also come with issues of forced sweatshop labor, including the Uyghur Muslims in concentration camps, by the way, which adds like another layer of oppression to that, right? And there's just all these ethical concerns that, again, a lot of people won't think too deeply about. It's not something we're trained to think about because in a capitalist society, you are trained to just spend your money on what's cute and what's trendy and not think long term about your clothing, where it comes from, where it's going, how long it's going to last. There's an idea that sustainability is just too expensive. And so it's a privilege of those who can afford to buy like super designer clothes that will last for years and years and years. But in terms of just like the everyday person like you and I, what do you think? Like, how can Muslims practically and ethically approach the question of sustainability and modest fashion?
I think somehow like this is in our faith, right? Like it's in the deen, where like the Prophet ﷺ, he was like somebody who really like embodied the idea of sustainability and of like not being wasteful. Like these are principles in our religion and in our like tradition, right? So this is something that really like motivated me and is one of the principles behind this brand as well, where like, sustainability, I feel like in a way has also become trendy, where it's like, like we're non-GMO, I don't know, organic, I don't know what the heck, like one of those things, right? But like this concept is like in its truest form, it's sustainability, right? And it's recycling clothes, and it's and quality clothes, by the way. Like if something is ripped and something can't be worn, throw it out. Like like don't waste our time with that. But if something really like is good quality and it's just sitting in your closet and you've spent the money and the resources to create that, like why let it go to waste, right? And I really think that like as Muslims, we should really be thinking twice when it comes to what we buy and how often we buy things and the model in which we buy things. Like the society we're living in is exactly against this like Islamic principle of like pretty much minimalism, right? If we're gonna use modern terms, like pretty much like minimalism, right? The Prophet ﷺ, like he had a minimalistic lifestyle, and you know, as Muslims, like we're not adhering to that at all, right? So I think that even though like clothing, like you know, the goal would be to actually buy less clothing, but since we have the clothing, like why not, you know, recycle it amongst our community? Why not like, you know, transfer it to somebody who needs a little bit more at a lower price, right? And it's still like much good quality, it's still like pretty much brand new, right? Most of these clothes have been worn like once or twice at most, right? So like so much wastage, like, you know, if this wasn't given to another person, right, who like, you know, is either like looking for it and really needs it, like so many convert sisters or so many like new hijabis, or somebody who like, you know, is just looking for something cute, you know, maybe Eid's coming up and it's like, you know, I want to switch things up, like, you know, why buy something completely new and like use all those resources when I could just buy something for a lot cheaper and it's for a good cause, you know, and it's like using that sustainability.
I'm glad you mentioned that, like even doing something like that for Eid, because that's another mindset shift that's really required even amongst ourselves, right? Because there's this idea a lot of people have, like, oh, buying used clothing is gross or shameful or for poor people, and it's not cool unless it's something like super fancy. And that is totally something that we need to actively work against, I think. As you said, if something is good quality, then we should be ensuring that we are not buying into the hype, literally, of I need something new, right? Like I need to go to the store and buy with like the label on it, because if it's not that, like, oh, gross, that's weird. Or even the idea of, you know, people simply not wearing their clothes very often. That's another thing to consider, where we just have closets and closets full of stuff that isn't worn. And what does that, again, like what does that mean for us? Like we are literally hoarding things like clothing and other things as well. And what impact does that have on our planet, on our ummah, on our mindset, on our akhirah for that matter?
I remember, like, for example, when I was doing the pop-up shops, some people would come up to me. I have to say, alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful. 95% of the people were like, wow, this is such a great idea, I love this. There was that small 5% who was like, oh, this has been worn before? Okay, like I'm just gonna put it back. And I'm like that mentality is just so sad to see, you know, honestly. And that's one thing though I have to give our generation a little bit more credit for, is that I think that because thrifting has become more trendy, it's really opened our minds to be like, okay, like something used, like who cares, like if it's still in a good condition, if it's still, you know, like we wash every single one of our clothes, by the way. Like most thrift stores don't do that, right? But again, there's like extra level of ihsan where it's like there should be no excuse for you to be like, oh, like I don't want to buy this used clothes. It's brand new, it's been washed, it's a good price. Like, come on. like it's just that stigma at the end of the day, right? Where it's like, oh, I'm too good for this piece of used clothing, you know. And it's like, what type of mentality is that, right?
And I was just thinking about something else you said about the way that also Saddam lived his life, and even historically, like when I think about it, historically, what did people do? They did not have access to the fast fashion that we do today. And so it was like clothing itself was an act of labor and an act of love. And we look to different cultures, like with Palestinians and their tatris, their stitching on their dresses. And these are things that they like made themselves and were meant to be worn for many, many, many years and even passed down. And when things did tear or rip or whatever, some kind of damage in some way, it wasn't like, oh, now I'm just tossing it. It was ways to reuse, right? Reuse, recycle, reduce. 3 R's we all learn in like what, kindergarten. And just keeping that mindset again, like what is, like historically what was done, and how can we kind of go back to those original principles in a really healthy way and a creative way too. And you know, I think about for those of us who come from, you know, certain cultures and have certain culturally specific clothing, and maybe somebody's like, wow, this shalwar kameez has been worn like 50 times and I'm like so over it. What can we do with it? Well, fine, like you reusing even that fabric to make cushions or a rug or something, right? Literally anything, and it can breathe new life into it. And then again, like reducing that element of like carbon footprint and landfill waste and all of that is just like really important things to keep in mind that I don't think we necessarily take the time to think about very deeply.
Yeah.
So I think these are all concepts and ideas around that whole sustainability element that, again, like it can be very trendy to talk about, but when it comes to the real world and what we're actually doing with what's in our closets, maybe that's not actually translated into reality very much.
That's so true.
What are some other themes that you see when it comes to things like modest fashion, accessibility, sustainability, even things like sizes? Like plus size abayas can be really hard to get access to, or plus size clothing in general is already a massive challenge. So have you already like seen plus size clothing coming to you for your store? Is that something that you would like to get more of? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, for sure. So, I'm actually like very, what's interesting is that like this model will really, it's the success or the failure is actively reflected in the community. If the community, has that good mentality, then this model will thrive. If the community isn't ready for it or maybe doesn't have the same mentality, then that'll be reflected in this model as well, right? So the same thing with plus sizes, for example, where like alhamdulillah, we actually have gotten a few larger sizes, which is great. Like, and it's interesting because again, it's not like I'm creating these clothes. I have control over like, let me make more plus sizes versus smaller sizes or vice versa, right? It really is like a true reflection of the community, where it's like whatever they decide to give or whatever they decide to sell to me, that is then, given back through the online shop or through the pop-up shops that we have, right? I think it's been very good. Like, for example, when I used to do pickups, right now, like before I used to go to people's houses and do the pickups, but alhamdulillah, obviously things have scaled a bit more. We have to, do drop-off locations instead. But before when I would do pickup locations, like mashallah, like a lot of women would be like, listen, like, back when I was like pregnant maybe, or maybe like, it was a different size, like, here's some clothes that didn't fit me anymore, or vice versa, where it's like, listen, like I used to have like smaller clothing, but now that, like I'm in a different phase of my life, this is something that, that I have access to now, right? And that I'm willing to give. I really think that it's good because this model really targets everybody. Like, even though students, I think, we struggle the most when it comes to these clothing, everybody benefits from it, right? Whatever stage you are in life, right? Like, we've had so many mothers who are like, listen, I need modest like maternity clothes, or like maybe sisters who are just like, a different size, where like I literally like, oh my god, most modest clothing stores, quote unquote, are all like very petite sizes. Even for me, as someone who I would say like is relatively petite, I'll be going to these stores and I'm like,
why is it so tight?
So small. Like, are you kidding me? Like, it's extremely limited. And that's one thing I'm very disappointed about with modest fashion, is that it's like, yeah, we're saying you're modest, but it's like you're modest for skinny girls. That's the only way you're modest for, if I'm being honest. Like, anyone else, it's like, yeah, this thing that looks great on, pictures, when you wear it, it's like very form-fitting because, this is being built for somebody who's like, like a different body type. So alhamdulillah, like with this model, you don't like, that issue isn't really there because it truly is like a reflection of the community, and it's very real, right? It's very much like whoever is using this service is also benefiting from this service, right? So there is a very good diversity of clothing sizes and of options,
I love that so much. And I really hope that somebody who's listening to this will be inspired to do something similar in their own community. Because really, as I'm thinking about it, I'm like, it has so much potential, especially in bigger communities. And you're located where exactly?
So I'm located in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. Okay. So right now we're pretty much serving the Toronto Muslim community, even though we do actually accept shipping of orders. Like, if just say someone wants to sell their clothes to us, they can ship their clothes to us, and our online store does offer international shipping. So we're not like very much limited towards like Toronto specifically. But of course, like the main, because this is targeted towards Western women, and like the lay of the land for Toronto is something that I understand very well.
Right.
Obviously, this is the primary target market. So many people have messaged me being like, can I start a chapter in like the States? Can I start a chapter in like the UK or like, BC or like, and I'm like, SubhanAllah, like, it's so interesting how this is like really such a needed concept, and it's, and I'm actually like so shocked. I mean, actually it has been done in different ways. Like, for example, like in the UK, I'll see there's like these like closet swap sort of things where like, influencers will get together and like, switch modest clothing with each other, or even just like, community members. But this is like, inshallah, like I would love to see like different chapters either of hijabi happening in different cities, different countries, or like, local people who maybe even know their situation even better being like, okay, this is what I want to do, and like having something similar.
I really think that your idea is just like so inspiring, mashallah, and it's is so, again, accessible, and it's something that, I mean, you'd be able to say best, like, whether how easy it is to set up or not. But I definitely think that, like, with a little bit of effort and a little bit of love and commitment, this is absolutely something that other people can mimic. And again, like, just spreading the word about the principles behind it, the accessibility, the sustainability, the affordability, because that's, of course, when it comes to our wallets, that's when we tend to pay attention the most. And it is an important part of the quote unquote hijabi fashion piece, right? And that would be something else I'd be interested in seeing how that would develop. Like, would this become something trendy enough that, you know, hijabi influencers would start supporting and be like, yeah, you know, let's jump in on this. Let us contribute to this. Because I'm sure we've all seen those videos where people are like unhauling or destashing, and then you're like, okay, well, where is it actually even going? Like, this is thousands of dollars of worth of like brand new things. Where are you actually getting rid of it? And I'm always curious. And I always hope that they're actually donating it to people in need, or, you know, those who are less able to access those things. You never know. But this would be like really great to see other people who are like in the thick of the hijabista influencer circles, modest fashion circles to take part and to encourage. I think that would make like a massive difference in how we think about these things in general and spreading the word, honestly. So with that having been said and done, do you have any final thoughts that you just like to throw out there for listeners on this general topic, or just any random thought, actually?
I think the biggest thing is, like, again, with the, I guess, with the mentality that sometimes we have as a Muslim community, right? Either like there's this mentality that, oh, like thrift stores, resale shops are for poor people, you know, like we can't, like we're not, you know, I don't associate, right? Or this is the sort of thing where it's like, oh, it's been worn before. It's like, I want to get something new, and it's, you know, it's whatever. Like, I really think that, again, like this model will either thrive or die pretty much according to like our mentality as a community, right? Like, what do we value? Like, do we value sustainability? Are we humble enough to, you know, not have this mentality of like, oh, it's been worn before, I can't do it, you know? Or, you know, like, I really think that, and but alhamdulillah, like, I have to say, like, I've seen such a positive response from this Muslim community. I'm very humble. Like, it really like warms my heart to see people being like, wow, like, it's more like, this is what I'm looking for, you know? And like, you know, like supporting it, not just in giving clothes, but also in purchasing clothes as well, you know? Like, it really is a full cycle moment, and I'm like, that has been the goal, right? Is like the three principles that we have is empower, sustainability, and affordability, right? So empowering in the sense of like, I don't want to just take your clothes as donations. I want to give money back to you. I want to put money into the pockets of Muslims, you know, and then also, you know, when they're purchasing from us, to make sure that we're not like pretty much ripping them off, right? Like this culture, pretty much like capitalist culture, just promotes that in such a like terrible way, but we're working actively against that, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. So affordability, sustainability, obviously, in the sense of, you know, this is like a not a community closet. I know that is like a common term that people use, but it is like promoting these like Islamic principles of not being wasteful, and of, if you have something that's brand new, you know, why keep it in your closet if you're not using it, you know, like, you know, recycle it in that way, right? And then affordability, where really, like, in terms of my mindset, like margins and price and everything, it's not the point. Like, even though inshallah, like, profit is definitely important, that's not the ultimate goal here at all, you know? Like, really making things truly affordable for the Muslim community, for like Muslim women specifically in the West, that is like genuinely the ultimate goal here. And inshallah, like, you know, I really think that I would love to see this idea being replicated, but I really think that it will only work with that mentality, right? A lot of thrift stores, like, if they don't have that genuine mentality to be like, you know, like, profit isn't the ultimate goal, then you're gonna, like you said, right? Like, these prices now are really going up with inflation, and it's like, are you sure this is a thrift store or not? You know, like, having that Islamic mentality that's rooted in our tradition really, I think, is like such a crucial aspect to seeing this thrive, you know? So that's pretty much like the one of the most important thoughts, to me at least, that I want to share. In terms of like, I guess, like a little shout out promo, like, you know, sort of thing, is like, listen, if there's anyone listening who, you know, has clothing that, you know, is lightly worn, that, oh, by the way, we don't accept cultural clothing. Like, typically we want to have something that's more Western. One thing I've realized is that when it comes to cultural clothing, like, the market is so different and the mentality is so different. You know, there's so much stigma when it comes to, like, especially as a Pakistani, like, you know, that idea that like, oh, like, I want to have the newest clothes for Eid, like, we wear it like once or twice and that's it. And it's like, it's such a deeply rooted like stigma. It's very hard to break out of. And also, like, it's very limited to like one or two cultures, right? And it's like, we want to offer this to anybody and everybody, right, in the West. So, you know, if you have like modest, you know, somewhat Western, or even like, you know, like abayas or something like that you want to sell, well. Inshallah, we are arranging drop-off locations for that around the GTA. If you're outside of the GTA, inshallah, like we accept shipping for clothes. And if you're looking for something that, is pretty cute, like you don't have to be like, some people ask, oh, is this just for like convert sisters or like for whatever? And it's like, no, why do we have to, like, we're all struggling here. We're literally all struggling out here.
We are.
It's like, why are we limiting it to one person? Like, please, like, don't think that.
Yeah, it's for everybody, right?
For everybody. So, definitely check out the website if you find something cute,
And I will be linking the website in the post so everybody can check it out. And yeah, take a look. And I really hope more people reach out to you as well. Not just to contribute to the thrift store, but just to explore their own options in their own areas and how they can do something similar. Because I just really loved everything that you mentioned about the empowerment, the sustainability, the affordability, the accessibility, and even more importantly, the bit about how such an effort really is a reflection of the community. So I'm hoping, inshallah, we can collectively have a reflection that empowers these kinds of efforts even more and people can really benefit. So jazakallah khair for joining me on the podcast today and just sharing your work and just this lovely chat that I think is so important for all of us who, I want to say like, who are invested in fashion, but it's not even about being invested in fashion. It's literally about just wearing clothing. So thank you for that.
No, thank you so much for inviting me, alhamdulillah. It's honestly been like such a lovely discussion and I was like super excited to, alhamdulillah, have this opportunity. So alhamdulillah, thank you so much. It's been amazing.
Jazakallah khair. And to our listeners, don't forget to stay tuned for the next episode and also leave your own thoughts and comments on the topic of sustainable, affordable, halal clothing and your own perspectives. Jazakallah khair. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Hey everyone, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast and follow us online on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram on our handle Muslim Matters. And check out our site daily at muslimmatters.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.